Hey, my name is Aiden Barrick, and today I wanted to talk about some misconceptions, specifically around the Salem witch trials. So, when most people think of the Salem witch trials, they imagine a small Puritan town gripped by strong superstition, burning witches at the stakes because of a fear of magic. And this image is largely dramatic and wrong. Salem witch trials of 1692 to 1693 are among some of the most misunderstood events in American history. And today I kind of want to correct three major misconceptions: how the accused were executed, why the trials happened, and who was targeted. So the first misconception is really that the accused witches in Salem were burned at the stake. That's like the biggest one I see. And in reality, no one was burned in Salem. According to historian Mary Beth Norton, all executions were carried out by hanging except for one man, Giles Corey, who was actually pressed to death with stones for refusing to enter a plea. Norton, 2002. Burning was a method used in parts of Europe. It never came to America. Never in Massachusetts, never in Salem. This error persists because Salem has become symbolically linked with European witch hunts, even though its legal practices were completely different. A second major misconception was that the trials were caused by simple superstition or just mass hysteria. There was no real direction to it. That's what people like to believe. And yeah, while the fear of supernatural definitely existed and played a decent role, most modern historians agree and emphasize that political instability, social conflict, and large legal failures played a much larger role. Salem in 1692 was suffering from the outbreaks of disease, threats of attack from Native American groups, and large economic inequality that's going to drive any territory into deep disarray and unrest. I mean, you can blame it on witches all you want, but there are background underlying problems that are really causing the tensions in this town. A historian, Bernard Rosenthal, explains that the trials escalated primarily because courts accepted spectral evidence, a testimony claiming that a person's spirit appeared to the accuser in visions or dreams. Rosenthal, 2009. Once this kind of evidence was allowed, accusations multiplied quickly because it was almost impossible to disprove. An even further widespread misconception is that the accused were all women, particularly outspoken or more rebellious and taboo women. While it's true that women made up the majority of the accused, men were also largely targeted, including ministers, farmers, and respected community leaders. In fact, one of the first people accused was Tituba, an enslaved woman, opposite of the normative. But those executed were men like John Proctor and George Burroughs, further demonstrating that most accusations weren't simply about silencing women or trying to keep women in check. It was often tied to property disputes, grudges, or even social power struggles. People largely believe the trials ended because the community suddenly came out of a spell or became more rational. However, the trials ended largely because authorities actually intervened. Of course, only when it affected them. Governor William Phipps, eventually dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer after accusations reached the governor's own wife. Once spectral evidence was banned, convictions almost immediately stopped. This is proof that the crisis was driven less by popular belief and more so by an institutional failure. What many tend to think is that Salem was an extreme or typical example of witch trials in history, but in truth, Salem was a very unnatural specimen. Not many cases of witch hunts in Europe saw as few deaths as the Salem trials did. Most of the time, there were thousands of executions, while Salem resulted in 20 deaths. But what makes Salem so historically significant is not really its scale, but how quickly legal safeguards kind of collapsed. once a fear took over. The Salem witch trials weren't about burning witches, blind superstition, or even targeting only women. They were the result of flawed legal practices, political anxiety, and a huge social division. Understanding these misconceptions matters because Salem can often be used as a warning symbol. We see real-life examples of this happening today, just maybe not so in the superstitious way. But what happens when fear overrides evidence and when the legal systems fail to protect the accused? Salem occurs.